Yay. Okay. So what are we going to get into today? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the HTML elements we've done and try and add some easier components to read and understand. We're going to introduce kind of the next project, or at least where I hope I want to go with it. And we're going to make some things a little bit easier for you. With some of the CSS stuff we've done, it's very much geared towards document layout. And as we build more complex web pages, we're going to find that that document layout has some advantages, but it also has some disadvantages. And there are some things that have been created and added to the whole suite of HTML and CSS in the last few years to try and get around some of those disadvantages. So we're going to try and see what they are. Now I'm going to start with a quick kind of review. When we build a page, it's probably part of a larger site. And the first page we go to is, again, always index.html. It always starts with one line. That's that doc type line. And after that doc type line, we're going to introduce a head section. In the head section, we're going to put in the title that goes on the title bar, and we're going to put in a link to our external styles and information. Once we put in that link to our styles and information, we may decide that we're going to add multiple what we call style sheets. And the biggest reason we would do this is we're kind of lazy, or at least most programmers are lazy, and they don't want to do the same thing twice. That just seems kind of time consuming. So what you probably have noticed already is that there are certain things when playing with CSS that are a royal pain in the you-know-what. Certain things just don't want to work right. And anyone tried to center anything? And did your brain hurt trying to make it get centered? Okay, I'm going to fix all those problems today in about 20 seconds with introducing some new concept. But before we get there, when we start thinking about our style sheets and the styles we put in there, I almost always segregate them out into two separate sheets. See, I know they're going to get loaded in the order and I list them in the head section. So I'm probably going to load two. The first one I'm going to load is going to be one that's very generic. I'm going to build up a style sheet over time. We're going to start small and it's going to get bigger and bigger. And that style sheet is not going to do anything so much as what it's going to undo. It's going to undo all of the web defaults that are giving me grief. The extra margins and paddings and certain widths on things and the default colors and the default font I want to use are almost always the same. And it's really annoying to have to go into the CSS and add the same CSS every time I do a new page. So at first I just cut and paste stuff. And the thing we teach most folks is that as soon as you start cutting and pasting stuff, you're cutting and pasting your errors all over the place. If you can imagine pasting something 3 times, if it's got a mistake in it, you now have 3 mistakes. So you kind of want to avoid doing that because it's inevitable that somewhere down the road you discover your mistake and you fix it in one of those 3 places. And you still have a mistake and you can't find it because you think you fixed it already. So to do that, we're going to break our CSS into 2 files. We're going to have a base CSS file that has all our base styles that resets everything. That way we're always starting from a known state, a state we created. And then we're going to have the CSS file we use for this particular page. And that's going to be the one that's just going to override the things that are different from our base. So I'm going to start with that today, and we're going to open up the editor. I'm going to fix up my biography so that it has 2 pages in it. We'll just take a look at that to start. Let's see what we got here. So I need to share and then make that a link available to you. There we go. So I'll put that in the text chat so that you guys can see it and follow along. Now, I'm also going to try and do this on my other screen here. It might be a little blurry down here, but if you just jump in and follow along with me. The way I'm going to carve this out is the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look in my bio, which is this file right here. And I've got my assets, my CSS file, and I've got my head section. And this is where I'm loading my Google fonts. I'm going to take my style sheet and I'm going to make a copy of it. I've got 2 of them there. Now it's going to load the same style sheet when it does that, which isn't optimal, but it's not going to break anything. And the next thing I'm going to do is create style base. That's going to try and load a file called style_base. And this goes back to that whole you never put a space in a file name. Part of the reason is because the browser thinks that's 2 separate files. And we don't want that. That'll just give us a mistake. So what we want is that style base. And over here, I probably need a real style base. So I'm going to create a new file. Called style base. And the one thing I am going to copy across is my name. Come on. No, I don't want to copy the whole file. Fingers don't work this morning. So what am I going to put in here? Well, I'm going to feed you some of the things I do. Now, you don't have to type this as we go. You can either cut and paste it when I'm done, or for the base stuff, I'm happy to post this and put it on Moodle. Okay. There are some things that I like to override, and they're not general styles that you just find by accident. They are things you can find if you go onto the internet and you look for CSS style resets or CSS style base. Quite often they're referred to resets, and they're just setting up your default behavior. So I'm going to do a couple things. First of all, scroll behavior smooth. This is just a style that makes sure that when I scroll the page, it doesn't snap and pop. It actually just has a nice smooth scroll. On the body, all body tag, the one body tag. Please, 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 please let me start with a 0 margin so I don't get messed up with those silly margins again. If I want a default font family, I'll put it here. And the ones that are preloaded, you'll see listed in the pop-up in Visual Studio Code. It's doing that command completion thing. I'm just going to pick something obvious. If you haven't got there, when you start playing with fonts, and there's a myriad of beautiful things you can do with fonts, but the things that always stick with me that we keep in mind are when you're looking at stuff on the page, you want fonts with serifs. That's your Times Roman. That's your Palatino. And when you're doing stuff on the screen, you want stuff without serifs, without the little edges on the font. And it's just that the human eye reads stuff on screen better without serifs. You also probably always want proportional fonts for the things you're doing on the screen for end users. That is, each character takes up a different amount of space. The thing is when we're working with editors like this, we really want to line columns up. So when we're working with text editors, we typically want fonts that are what we call non-proportional, or every character takes up the same space. I'm going to set my default color to some kind of dark grayish color, and we're going to do that. We're going to do that a new way for you. So what does that kind of number represent? Hashtag 2929. Anyone? Go ahead. It is a yeah, it is a hexadecimal. What does it represent?
The red, the green, and the blue.
Yeah. So it's the red, the green, and the blue. The first number this is the shortcut for colors on the web. Red, green, and blue. Each one is a value between 0 and 255. And when we use a hexadecimal as opposed to a decimal notation, we're using base 16 instead of base 10. And that means every number in the digits column, if I separate them out, so that means 9 units and 2 groups of 16, just like a 10 would represent in base 10, 1 group of 10 and 0 units. So if we convert this, we have 9 units plus 2 groups of 16. 2 times 16 is 32, plus 9 is 41. And that's the decimal equivalent of that hexadecimal number. Now that always creates the problem, because when you're using groups of 16, what do you use as a single character to represent number 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15? And the answer is we just use letters. Perfectly valid. So that's 2 groups of 16 plus B in hexadecimal, which is 11. So 32 plus 11. 43 now. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that when you're playing with these colors, because we're doing additive color, we're going from black to white. The more numbers you add or the more values you add, the closer it gets to white. When we're stepping up along that path, if we were to chart colors on a little grid, we would find that all of the colors that map exactly diagonally across that grid, where all the numbers are the same, always add up to a shade of gray. So if all 3 numbers are the same, it's a gray, somewhere in the gray scale. So that 0 is white, and all full values are black. Now, so black in this scheme here so what would we use for black using this shorthand?
0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
Just like that. And what do we use for white?
255, 255, 255.
And in base 16, we would have to convert that into, you only get two characters.
Is it 1 one F or like one B or something. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Is that Greek to everyone? A little bit. Think about the way you do normal numbers. See if I can do it right here. If you use the number 125 as an example.
So we can't just use like the red, you know, just put like.
Yeah, you can. So for colors, I'll throw that here as well because it's perfectly valid. For colors, you can either use the name of a color if you just want a pure color. Okay? And I believe there's 32 of them predefined. Or you can use the CSS function RGB.
That's way better. Yes, I like that. See, my life is much simpler now.
And if you want to add alpha, into that,
See, Scott, that's way simpler. You know, making you do math and subtract and divide and.
everything you do is going to involve math. Get used to the math. Love the math.
Copy paste.
Everything we do in graphics is math. Every visually thing we do is math.
No, I know, but not typing it in. You know, typing it in the code, it's like it just screws up my brain.
So one question, the RGBA, the alpha is like transparency or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the 4 ways to specify colors. All right. So if you have one of the base colors, you can just type its name in. The 2 functions here in CSS will compute a color value for you. They compute this. That's the shorthand. So when you're doing just a gray, it's easier to just type the shorthand in. What other defaults am I going to add here? Well, I'm going to throw one in for anchors. I'm going to make them all white. Text decoration, none. I don't want all of my links to be blue with a blue underline under them. So I'm going to make them all just white. And I'm going to put a little border around them. Transition. We haven't got to the really fun stuff yet. And that's good enough for right now, I think. I don't think there's a lot more we're going to add there right away. What I am going to do with this is make sure that I load it first. So that I load my style base and then I override my style base with my styles. And the idea I have here is that as I build up my styles, if I find something in my style.css that I want in every application I do in the future, I'm going to cut it out of my style.css and paste it into my style base. And in this page, it'll just work. It'll pick up the style base first and then the overrides out of style.css. However, if I want to use that in a future page, I can just copy the whole style base file into the next page I do, the next folder. Just make a copy of the whole file. and load that in the head section, and voila, I'm at my base styles again. White text, black background, Helvetica font, no margins, no paddings. Everything's kind of simple and straightforward. So in this way, I can get kind of a base look and feel. And if you're ever working on a big site, this is how they make the whole site look similar, right? Every page has the same base styles. Then the page only has to define the styles that are customized for that page. Okay, where else can we make some improvements? Well, one of the things we can do when we put our body section together is to not use as many of the old obsolete tags. When you started building your bio, you use divs and spans because you can literally build everything out of them. But they're not that readable. After a while, you start to get kind of a div soup. It's like divs everywhere, and they're all nested and indented, and you can lose track of where you are. So we have added more HTML elements to make it easier to read your pages. When we add lists, we added unordered lists and ordered lists because it made more sense to put a different tag in there. And part of the evolution of the language was when they create a new tag, they have to tell a browser how to deal with it. So when we start styling and putting our HTML together, what we want to do is use tags that are as descriptive as possible. So for all those things that we would normally build kind of like this, we're going to start adding additional tags in to make things a little bit easier to understand. And we're going to do that by looking at some new tags. And these new tags don't do anything different than a div and don't have any different attributes than a div. But these new tags are there to help you with readability. That's all they're there to do. They're just a little bit of sugar on top to make it easier to read a page. If we look at my index.html with all the divs in it, and we look at it in the editor here, you'll see it's really a lot of divs nested inside divs. Well, I'm going to go back and add some of these semantic HTML tags to see if it makes it a little bit easier to read. There's a header tag and a footer tag. There's a navigation tag for menus and navigation bars. There's an aside tag you can use if you have sidebars. And it doesn't specify where the sidebar is. We do that with CSS. But it does tell you that this is a sidebar thing, not the main thing. And to complement that, there's a main tag. And the main tag says, hey, here's the part you should pay attention to. That's my main content. And inside my main content, I might have lots of different subsections. So there's a section tag we can use. So we can see how this fits and see how it makes our life a little bit easier. If I go back to my editor here, I can take this div id equals header and replace it with a header tag. Make sure they're the same top and bottom. I can take this div id equals main and make it a main tag. And make sure they're the same top and bottom. And inside here I have a couple containers. And I'm going to keep the IDs in. But I might go section. Section. And at the bottom, I have a footer here that I haven't done anything with.
And that's not going to change the div? Like, it's still a div just with a different name?
Right. The only thing is that any styles that are attached to the div won't apply anymore. Okay? Now, again, programming guys are kind of notoriously lazy. And I don't want to rewrite all of these styles and cut, copy, paste them for header, footer, main, section. let's just apply those to all of them.
And you can put like any name you want, like whether it be like I don't know, intro or introduction.
As an ID, yes. These tags are... The browser understands the tags. It actually converts the tags to divs, but it gives you the ability to say, you know what? I want the header section to be a different background color.
And that automatically like turns it into
So that selects the header tag, and only the header tag. And everything inside the header. Right. So this selector picks up these styles, which apply to the header tag. And this selector picks up this additional style, but only for the header tag. So it adds them together.
Yeah, and it's a lot quicker, right? I guess.
Yeah, and your CSS file is shorter, which means it's easier to manage. So those are the semantic tags that help our HTML page be a little bit easier to read. Now, inside here, I have this menu. And the menu here, I put in a nav tag. And now as I start to look at the HTML, it becomes a little clearer what's going on. I have a main page with a bunch of sections in it. Totally clear, makes sense. I have a header and a footer, and I put the navigation bar inside the header. Oh, I want the navigation bar outside the header? Oh, that's okay. I can do that too. I take the navigation bar and I put it outside the header. Reset it. I'm going to leave my navigation bar inside the header. Let's say I want my header to be fixed to the top of the screen. I just override the top, say, hey, make the top 0, which is the top of the screen. The coordinate system in our browser starts at 0, 0, and it's the upper left corner of the screen. And if you're looking at your browser right now, and you're looking at Chrome as a browser, I'll illustrate the first difference between Chrome and Firefox. If you actually look at the Chrome browser, let me go grab another page for you. Something I can share. If we're looking at our browser here, and you follow my little dancing mouse, 0, 0 in Chrome is right up here in the corner. Right. See if this funny toy works. So 0, 0 is right here. Unless you're in Firefox. In Firefox, 0, 0 is right here. The menu bar, the bookmarks bar, are all, right, in case you don't get it, right there. The address bar and the bookmarks bar in Firefox is part of the space you have. In other words, if you put something at 0, 0 in Firefox, it goes in behind those things. If you put it at 0, 0 in Chrome, it shows up here. Just because the browsers don't want to be 100% the same, that would make our lives too easy. So something to be aware of when you start styling things and pushing things to zero edges, you might have to special case specific browsers. Now, once we have this idea that we have some semantic HTML, then we can go ahead and start using some of the tags that we've used in the past to build up the content within our page. And as we build the content within our page, we're going to more and more rely on CSS to figure out how it works and how it fits together. We can take a look at some of the lists that we do. And for every list, we're going to style it so that it appears the way we want it to appear. Meaning, we can make lists that look like normal lists or bullet lists or numbered lists, but more often what we do on the web is we turn lists into menus. And we turn them into menus by going ahead and changing all the styling on them. We take the default elements off. We tell them to make them inline type elements, not block elements. Block elements stack this way. Inline elements go this way. And then we tell them, hey, they're in a div or a container that stretches the full width of the browser. Now I got a menu bar that goes across the whole browser. I want to make it look like a Windows app. I can push that fixed to the top of the page. I want to do something interactive with it. I want to make menus that I can see. Well, you know what? There's no sense reinventing the wheel. So this is a place where you probably want to go find some sites that have samples of these things for you. And one of the ones was mentioned early on. One of the places we go demo some of these things, there are some online test beds that you can use to try stuff out to see what happens. And one of them is called CodePen. And CodePen's really kind of a cool, powerful site in that you can get a free account there and just try snippets of HTML and CSS, and it will show you what they look like, which means you don't have to mess up your whole page to test something out.
Are we allowed to do that?
Oh, yeah.
For example, I'm reading a book for the biography thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I think my brain just simplifies whenever it's like on paper. And it's okay if I use some of the codes that they have there, you know, as long as it fits the assignment. Is that okay?
Yes. The things I would warn people is, just because somebody wrote it down doesn't mean it's right. And if you're going to use any code, whether it's from the internet or a textbook, anywhere, the common courtesy is not to plagiarize it, meaning don't take it as your own. And the easy way to do that in any sort of HTML, CSS code of any kind is put a comment in. This section taken from, and put a reference to where you got it from. This URL, this website, give the original author credit. When people at the school talk to you about plagiarism in the first week, right? They say, don't copy stuff. Copying is evil. Well, yeah, but so is reinventing the wheel. So the trick is plagiarism is about copying other people's work and claiming it to be your own. So don't claim it to be your own.
Okay, so I'm just going to put like a little note at the bottom, like this part was taken from this book.
Put a comment right in the code. But right in the HTML, you know.
Okay.
Right? Give the person credit. Now, I will tell you from experience that anytime you go looking on the internet or in a book for some code to do some things, it's never going to 100% match what you want to do. So you're always going to have to modify it somehow. So what you end up doing more often is looking at how someone else did it to get an idea how you might do it.
But then would that be plagiarizing if I do that?
Now, if you rewrite your own,
Okay, I'm just gonna. But if I type it and I make it my own, then it's
your own. I still put the comment in, right? Original concept by.
I'll just put it at the bottom because I mean it's the same book. I'm just gonna put it at the bottom.
Yeah.
Like, this is where I took it from. Like my inspiration came from.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I want to play with is I want to play with nav bars. And W3 Schools, I've shown you, has a really nice nav bar demo here. There's no point in me reinventing this. I want to do a nice menu. Right? And so I've got their sample here, and I'm just going to move over to the old try it yourself. Hey, wow, that doesn't look anything like what they did. So let's go add some styling. Style none, margin padding 0, and I get rid of the dots. Oops.
What's that website called again? Sorry.
W3 Schools, if you look up CSS, not just HTML, they have a full CSS guide as well. And they have a section on building nav bars.
Thanks.
Okay? Almost everyone uses this. So let's say I want to do my horizontal nav bar. I'm just going to flip over to it. Mostly it's about changing some of the CSS. So we're just going to flip down to their example down here and know that the horizontal nav bar is just an unordered list with a number of styles attached to it. And here's the styles they use. Now you can change the fonts pretty easily. The other thing they have going on here is something that you only need to worry about if you're working on a mobile device. Hovers don't work on mobile devices. You know, when I hover over things, it changes color. Let's just go. I can change the colors of them. So that's a perfect place to go finding examples. And this is typical when you're building sites. You design it on paper, you get an idea of what you're doing, and you can either struggle forever making it look the way you want, and recognize that as we're learning how to do it, I'm more interested in the way you write the code than the code you write. Right? Learning how to build CSS pages is more important than what your CSS does. In other words, if you make an ugly page, I'm not going to take marks off because it's ugly. And in fact, as we program stuff, particularly for games, we typically tell the programming folks that if you're missing art, to make ugly art. Because ugly art usually makes people replace the art very quickly. So the fastest way to get new art in something, whether it's a web page or an application you're building, is to build ugly, ugly, ugly art to begin with. And the usual go-to is Comic Sans Serif in lime green on a fuchsia background. That usually makes people with any sort of art sensibility whatsoever scream no and replace it very quickly. So when we're building things like our menus, we're going to use examples like this to help us do some fancy CSS effects.
That's where I would reference.
Yeah. Yeah. All you'd have to do is put this URL in a comment, right?
Okay.
Menu example from W3 Schools. Here's the link.
It's going to be like my whole webpage example.
Except you're probably not going to agree with their font choices or their color choices, which means you immediately are going to change it.
but you said we didn't have to make it that pretty.
That's right. But you're still going to change it, right? Yeah. Okay, good.
Right.
I'm glad we agree on that. All right. So from there, where do we go? Well, what other kind of things are typical problems that we run into? Well, the typical problem that most people run into when they're doing their bio pages isn't got anything to do with lists or the way we do, let me flip to, or the way we do anchors or the way we do images. The typical problem people have when I ask them to do their bio page is they get this idea of building things in sections and they can't get anything to line up straight. Everything is kind of off center. So I'm going to take a short break. We're only going to take a 10-minute break here. And when we come back, we're going to start into doing some more sophisticated CSS, leading to how do you deal with centering things? And how do you deal with getting things aligned the way you want them? Okay. So I'll come back at 5 to 10. And when I come back, we'll start looking at some more sophisticated CSS layout stuff. All right. All right. I'll break fresh coffee. So we're going to start into this section taking a look at reviewing how CSS gets applied to our HTML. And we're going to start there by looking at how selectors work. In gory detail here, we're going to make some HTML. And our HTML is going to have an element and it's going to have some attributes. And that HTML element has ways that our CSS can be attached to it.
Other people can hear
you. You're right. No, it's not just you. Right. This is just kind of a review of how we attach those things, right? So when we look at our HTML elements, the kind of generic formats here on the page, and when we look at one of those elements, it's got a tag name, it's got an ID attribute, and it's got a class attribute. And we can use those to attach our styling information. So we can think of those a lot like filters. You build your HTML page, and then your CSS goes through and searches for things. And when it finds something, a selector that matches, it applies the styles to the thing it found. So we can attach things to elements, that's the div. We can attach things to classes, those are the dot elements or the dot selectors in our CSS. And we can attach things to IDs. Now, it'll work attaching things to IDs. Generally, it's considered something that you band-aid together because you couldn't figure out any other way to make it work. And so we, generally speaking, don't want to have a lot of styling information attached to a specific ID. When we use the HTML class attribute, we can make those names of classes anything we want, right? You can even define multiple classes so that you can construct different looks by combining classes together. Now, the class names by convention should be all lowercase with hyphens separating words, and they should be descriptive words that aren't redundant. So don't use words like class or style in the names of your classes and styles. The ID attribute uniquely identifies a specific element in the HTML page. And here again, if you're wondering, is another difference between Chrome and Firefox. If you go to select ID my div, which is a really poor name for that div, but if I go to select it in Chrome, the styles that will apply to the first instance Chrome finds of my div. And it will ignore all the other ID equal my div. So if you use the ID in more than one location in Chrome, it only applies it to the first one. If you do that in the exact same page and CSS in Firefox, Firefox will apply the styling to the last div it finds. Just the way in which they're searching for things. So we typically try and keep our styling away from the IDs. When we do our styling, we are going to add our styles to the class attributes, and we can add multiple styles. A great kind of quick way to remember how these fit together. We can either style the element, we can create a class that's just a name or a label we created to go search for similar things. We can create an ID if we're in desperate need, or on the element itself in the HTML, we can set the style attribute. The other thing is the order I have them listed here is the order in which they get applied. So not only do they get loaded from the files in the head section first, and in the sequence in which they get loaded, they get used, they also follow this kind of hierarchy. This is part of what we call the cascade of the cascading style sheets. They get applied from the most generic to the most specific, and they get applied in the order in which the CSS elements are defined inside your HTML page. So just some quick examples. The P selector here would apply all those styles to every paragraph tag in your page. .myStyle applies these styles to every HTML element that has a class attribute that contains my-style in it. And this element only applies to an element whose ID is exactly the same as this -element -only. So you leave the period and the hashtag off in the HTML file. Right. Now, inside each selector is a collection of styles. And those styles dictate what things look like. And as we played with more and more of these styles, we started to manipulate them a little bit, but you'll get the sense that breaking them up into smaller pieces can sometimes help you. In this case, I broke the left float and the bold of the font, because they're completely unrelated, into two separate styles. And then I used them both in the class attribute to apply them in order. This goes left first and then gets bolded. And the reason I did this is there may not be every element in my page that I want to slide to the left, and there may not be every element in my page I want to make bold. So here I can pick and choose, and I can combine them together. There is no technical limit on how many styles you can apply to a class. There are just reasonable limits. In other words, by the time you get 5 or 7 classes attached to a div, you probably want to combine a few of them, because it gets a little bit hard to read and manage. And likewise, if you're trying to get everything in just one class, and then you're repeating 90% of that class in your style.css to do some one thing that's slightly different, you're better off separating those out. When we're looking at our style.css, we can often figure out how to do this just by looking at the way we put the styles together. In my first bio example here, I have a menu style. And that menu style has lots and lots of stuff in it. So the first thing I typically will do is, as I'm neating and tidying my code, is I'll put these in alphabetical order so I can find them more easily. And the second thing I might find is I've got this as my base menu, but sometimes I'm going to have maybe a menu that is a left justified menu and sometimes a right justified menu. So in my case, I might create a menu left class and then take these styles out . Yeah, let's put these ones in as well. And put them in the menu left. And then give myself a note. So just a simple comment to let me know that, I broke this one big, huge selector into 2 selectors and pigeonholed some of the styles in each one to make it a little easier to choose to do a left menu or a left menu with my, beautiful green on cyan background. So as you're building them, it's one of these things that evolve. You start with some HTML. As you start to add the styling information in your CSS, you just keep adding styles as you're making it look the way you want it to look. And at some point, you'll run into these big classes where you then have to decide, does it make sense for me to split it out into separate components, which I might do in the future. Now, what goes with this is also just a quick look at what we did last time, which is everything in our web page is built around this idea that everything fits in a box. And this box model diagram is something you can embed in your brain and come back to again and again and again and again. The browser will take your content and figure out how big it is. If your content is 0, if your content is empty, and it's 0 in either dimension in terms of size, in either width or height, then the browser will not display it at all. It's trying to be efficient. The other thing is, and no one tells you this, but if you use percentage units to try and take an empty div and make it a certain size, if you use percentages in both dimensions, it'll still come out 0. All right. So one of the dimensions needs an actual dimension if you're going to use width and height to size it. More common when we're doing pages is to let the content dictate the size. When we're figuring out how much around it we want to use, how much space around it, we have both padding and margins we can play with, which is why in our default styles we want to reset them back to 0. So let's make sure we do that. Style base, I have margin 0, probably also want to put padding 0. Whenever you're using zeros in your CSS, you don't put units in, because 0 pixels and 0% and 0 virtual width are all the same. They're still 0. We can also manipulate the borders. So we can start to build things that have interesting borders on them. And if you start looking at some of the border styles, you'll find that the borders aren't just restricted to a certain thickness or a certain dashed or solid or a certain color. You can actually do some fancy things with them. So let's adapt this, and I'm going to go down and build a kind of enhanced version of my biography here, just to highlight a couple kind of interesting things. And I'm going to do it by making a copy of it to start with so I can mess with it. I'm going to close the files up. I'll make a copy of that folder. I'll rename it. Now,
and is it okay if we only have one CSS folder and one HTML?
Yep.
It's okay, right?
Yep.
We don't have to have two?
Yep.
Okay.
Right. So for tonight, just one is fine. Right. You don't even have to ever do this. It just makes your life faster and easier.
When you copy your files, well, when you duplicate your folders,
yep.
You don't have any problem like redirecting the the style bases, right?
Nope.
Or the style sheets. Nope.
Nope. When we're listing references to files, they're relative. They're relative to where index.html is. So when I copy the whole folder, as long as my references are relative, then things are going to find each other very nicely. Where I run into problems is if I do this.
If we write the whole folder down.
Yeah, it will definitely not work.
Thanks.
Okay. Even if you just start with the slash at the beginning, that will definitely not work either. This is the way we build websites up. We build them on our local machines. And when we want to deploy them to the world, what you really do is you hire a web hosting service and they expose stuff to the internet. I mean, what they really do, let's say you called up GoDaddy, went to their webpage, said, hey, I've got this site I got to build. You would build the site locally on your computer. You would not build it on their tools to begin with. One, it's super slow to build that way. But more importantly, if you mess anything up on the public version of your site, it's messed up for good. The advantage of building everything locally is you can build it and test it and make sure everything works locally before you upload it to your public website. So let's say I wanted to publish this. I go to GoDaddy, I say, here, I want to publish my site. They say, you got to purchase a URL, an actual address on the internet, and you need to attach it to an address that we can go to. And they'll take care of that for you. You just have to come up with the URL that you want, mygreatpage.com. And they search mygreatpage.com and say, nope, nobody's got that. You can buy it. Give us your $100 and it's yours. So you do that, and then they give you a link to a tool that they have, an online web tool, and it says upload your site. So what do you upload? Well, you upload the contents of your folder. So index.html, CSS, and assets. And it'll go into a file. Usually it's called public_HTML. And that public_HTML is where people get directed to when they go to mysite.com. And the only thing your website can see are the files underneath that public HTML folder. So any of the paths that you use when you build your site to any external files can only go as high up in the directory tree as that root folder. So that's why we do everything relative, so I can pick up a whole site and move it to a public-facing site just by uploading all the files into the right folder. And it's a really straightforward process. And once you've done it once, it becomes real quick. But get used to building things on your machine first, right? Debug them here. It's faster, it's easier, and if you break it and it looks like crap, no one sees it. And even if you have a fix to do on a public site, if you ever get work doing that, you typically will download the whole public site or use your copy of the whole public site to do the fix and do the change and then upload the whole thing again. So it's a quick cutover. In my little bio here, I made a copy of it because I want to play around with something. I want to make sure I do kind of a fun menu. And one of the things I want to play around with is play around with some of these borders. So I'm going to, show you what the page looks like in a second. I'm going to run a little tool to help me keep it up to date. There we go. And we can see I've made it something really nice and ugly here. What I'm going to start with is I'm going to take this little home guy and I'm going to make him a button and turn it into a button. So the first thing I'm going to do to turn it into a button is I'm going to wrap it in either a span or a div. And I do that by wrapping that span around the content. And if you look at the slide or the screen that it builds, it doesn't really look any different. That's because I don't have any styling on it yet. When I go to make the styles for it, I can flip to my style.css and create a button style. And in there, I'm going to change a few things. So in my CSS, I just took the My Button class and started adding styles to it. I can see what they're going to look like. Now I want to make it look a little bit like a button, so I'm going to add a padding. Now that's kind of big, so let's go a little. That's a little better. But the square edges kind of bother me, so I'm going to put a border on it so I can see where they are. There we go. So now we got a border. Now, it still looks kind of angular to me, so I'm going to soften it up a little bit. Let's go a little bigger so you can see it. And now we're softening it up a little bit here. So the trick with this is that you're not going to memorize all these styles, but once you've got access to the W3 Schools CSS page, it lists all the styles that you can play with and all the possible parameters for them. So by digging through, I found, hey, there's this cool border radius thing. And I can change the curvature of the little corners of things just by playing around with it. Now, you know what else would be really cool here is if I could do drop shadows on it. Well, if I look at my CSS, the CSS isn't really crazy to get that button looking like a button. But I really want some more. I want a drop shadow on it. So how am I going to find a drop shadow? Well, let's just walk through the process and go to the web page, W3 Schools, CSS, and I'm going to look at the reference guide, and down here I'm going to see all the properties that exists. And I don't even really know what it is, but I know that they're generally called drop shadows. And drop gets me nothing. So what does shadow get me? Oh, look at this. Box shadow. Okay. Let's go take a look. Box shadow. What the heck is going on here? And what it tells you is when you read the manual here is the different properties that you can attach. So here, this tells you the different properties that are attached to this style. And they actually have a little demo of each one of them. So I've got a horizontal offset, a vertical offset, and how much blur to use, and how far to spread apart them. With the radius, I can use different colors. Well, that's cool, right? And I can change it from an inner to an outer shadow. So the real trick is to then start playing with it, right? Add a blur effect to the shadow. Define the spread radius of the shadow. So these parameters are just taken in positional order. First parameter, second parameter, third parameter, fourth parameter. So let's try and add a simple box shadow to our little home guy here. And let's go 0.5 em. Oops. Usually when I set these things up to begin with, I'll set them up with really big numbers. So I see that just using two numbers, I get this really solid look. And so I'm going to slowly add pieces to it experimentally to see how I can make it look really kind of cool. Now, add the blur effect here. Add the blur radius. So let's add a blur radius. And now we get a blur there. Now that gets us the basic box shadow in there. The next part I would go to is I would bring up the debugger, the inspector, and in the inspector, I would go play with my item. So here it is, and now I can start to manipulate things. To get me something a little bit more interesting. And you can start to manipulate the different parts that are working with it. So we can play around with those styles to get a look that we want. There's a bunch of styles that we typically see all over the place, and you guys have been playing with these already. But understand that there are other extensions to these styles and related styles that can chiefly affect how things look on your page. The other thing we're playing with was positioning. And when we were playing with positioning the other day, I gave you this diagram to look at. You can look at how things are positioned. So this is the position style applied to something. And when you position something statically, it stays on the page. So the way we think about the way our web page works is that our browser is a window into our page. Our page can be longer than the browser can show. So what the browser does is it considers itself a window and it allows you to scroll the page behind it. That's the way to think of it. When we position something statically, it stays in the same place on the page no matter what the browser is looking at. So you can scroll it out of the way if your page is long enough. If we do something relative positioned, that means it's positioned relative to the parent element that it's inside, which is why we typically nest things so deep, because we want to change the offsets depending on whether or not something's inside a div or not. When we position something absolutely, we position it relative to the top left corner of the browser. And when we position something fixed, we attach it to the browser and not the web page. Now, the absolute one and the relative one are the ones that go hand in hand together because you can combine them. In other words, you can take a div, make it positioned absolutely, put it inside a relatively positioned div, which is inside another relatively positioned div. And now the absolute positioning is positioning relative to the parent. And if that's all super confusing, adding to that to try and get things centered becomes a little bit more of a challenge. And there's tricks people have done to do it over the years. The most common trick is to use the auto keyword with the margin. If you select a margin of 0 in the vertical direction and automatic in the horizontal direction, it will try and center your content. Try. Depending on how many divs it's buried inside, it may or may not work the way you expect. So this has left us with a bit of a problem because as we start to build more sophisticated pages, the line between a web application and a web page starts to blur, and you want to build your web pages to have content that is dynamic to have content that's changing in terms of the way it's laid out, but still be relatively centered regardless of what size browser it's on. And to do that, I'm going the wrong way here. And to do that, we're going to need a few things. The first thing we're going to need is the ability to add multiple selectors so we can select certain styles for common elements. So I kind of hinted at this earlier when I used a whole bunch of different tag names separated by commas. You could also do this with heading styles. And we're going to use this when we start to style things and center them more easily. We can also add multiple selectors into our CSS. And this helps us select very specific elements. So for instance, this .wrapper space .main space em only affects em tags that are inside a div of the class main area that are also inside a div of the class wrapper. So it's very, very specific selector. So those kind of extra things will help us as we start to look at how we're going to center stuff. The other thing we're going to look at is figuring out how we put these pieces together. So the thing that we created with the with CSS styling in the last few years was all about how do we get things centered? How do we do that easily? Can't the computer figure that out? And lots of programmers tried to do it programmatically with JavaScript, and it can be done, it's just painful. So adding to JavaScript and CSS in the last few years, people added a new construct in CSS, and that construct is called a flexbox. Now, the idea is that the flexbox is another display type, just like block or inline block. And that with a traditional layout, our typical flow was to either flow things top to bottom or left to right or some combination of those things, which worked kind of well with pages. But as soon as we started doing these hybrid apps, it started to fall apart. And the most common way it falls apart is when people try and lay out grids of things together. And it can be particularly challenging, as you guys have found. So for your next assignment and application, we're going to start using the flexbox to style things in a little bit easier way. Now, if you're not using the flexbox, you're going to have to set the widths and possibly heights of every container you use, and then decide which way they should float, and then decide which kind of display to use, either inline or block or inline block. And again, Firefox and Chrome behave differently this way. Inline block in Chrome does kind of what you expect. It's a block. If it can fit, it does the next one inline. And once we set the float, in this case, I set the float to the right-hand side of the container. I will have to clear those floats if I want something to float to the left-hand side. And this seems complicated, like more complicated than it should be. And that's why we built these flex boxes, because there's a new display type with a few new style attributes that can get rid of most of this and make it easier. So the solution comes with adding that new type. And with that new flexbox layout type, you get control over the alignment, centered, left, right, and spacing between them. You get control over directionality. So if I have a container and I have 10 little subcontainers inside it, I can decide whether they flow left to right or top to bottom. Do they go in columns or rows? And do they wrap or not? I can override the ordering. I can make something more important than something else and percolate it to the top. I can also tell the browser how to size or scale it automatically. In other words, as you stretch the browser, using the Flexbox mechanisms, we can tell it that the container, when it changes, the items inside change automatically. And not only can we tell them to change automatically, we can tell them to change automatically in a specific ratio relative to the other things in that same container. Okay, the words sound really weird. Let's just boil it down. There are two concepts here. You have flex containers and flex items. Most of the styles go on the container. Items go inside a container. These are styling elements, meaning you can put them on any HTML tag you want. The parent container containing items has most of the styles on it. And the core styles we use are justify and align. When we justify our content, we figure out, does it float to the left, does it float to the right, or does it center automatically? And when it centers, do I make the space between all the items equal, or do I make the space on the outsides equal and butt the things side by side? When I align items, that's top to bottom. Do they go in rows or columns? How much space goes around them? Do I fill the container, or do I push everything to the top or the bottom, or do I center it vertically? So with a couple styles attached to a display flex item or a display flex style in the container, I can take a single div and center it vertically and horizontally with two styles. All right. So let's take a look at how we put that into practice. In our little sample guy here, and I'm going to fix a couple things up. I'm going to restyle the title a little bit here. So we're going to start by changing some of these things to make our lives a little easier. First of all, I'm going to make the font size a little bigger or a little smaller. And then I'm going to make that header. What have we got here? There we go. And then I'm going to take my two photos that I have in here. I'm going to remove one of them and we're going to play with the other. And I'm going to put some borders in so we can see what's going on. So I'm going to start here by removing one of my images. And now I've got my little red box. I'm going to get rid of that too. Yeah. Okay. Get rid of this guy. So, for test purposes, all I did here is I commented some stuff out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my container a flex box. And the way we make it a flex box is I go find my container style. Where's my container style? I haven't got container style. Oh, there it is. Center, no, container. If you're having problems finding things like I am right now, inside Visual Studio Code, there's this outline. And the outline automatically goes through and lists all your styles. And you can tell it how to sort them. I have them sorted by name. So I can look here, all containers under C, so dot something, nope, not there. Close that up. So let's go add that container. Display flex. Now, nothing obviously changed there, but what we're going to do is we're going to set that container, first of all, to be the full size of the page. 100% of the virtual width. And then what I'm going to try and do here is justify the content. And you can see from my pull down all the different options. I'm going to go with the center and see whether we can make it work. Right. Now, we'll take a look here. So our flex box has a certain size to it. And what we see is that as we build it, right, it doesn't really behave the way I kind of expected it to behave. And part of that is that I have the image on the same thing as the container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap some containers around it to see if we can make it look a little bit nicer. So here, now all of a sudden, I can see some stuff going on. I also see that my menu is stuck to the top there. So right now, let's just get rid of it. It's just confusing. Now that's great if I have one item. I can center it pretty quickly, just with a couple lines. If I want to align it top to bottom, it's now in the center of my page. And by changing the height of the page, I can change how the centering works. If I change the height to 60 vertical height units.
And that you change it in the CSS, right?
Right. Right.
Oh my god, I'm so happy. Thank you.
And for example, if you still have the other image and you have both images inside the container, will they both be like aligned?
Yeah, this is the fun part. Let's add the whale image back. And I'm going to scale them so that they're a little smaller. Okay, so I got these two images. I'm going to go to my image box and I'm going to make it a little smaller. Let's make these 250 by 175, just for giggles. Okay, now what happens if I change justify content from center to space around? So when I change it to space around as justify, justify is left to right. And what it does is does an equal amount of margin around each thing to put the two in the middle. In other words, the two of them have the exact same amount of spacing around the outside. And there's another one called space between. Now I want the space between to be equal. In other words, I want everything pushed out. Space evenly. So I'm sorry I made you struggle with your bio page. Leave your bio page, don't modify it now. All right?
I think I'm gonna modify it.
Because I'm going to give you another assignment today. And we're going to build, oh yeah. So we're going to build a new site, a new page, right? And I'm going to feed you some more information next week on it. But the new page we're going to build, we're going to use entirely flexboxes to make a landing page. And the landing page we're going to make is for a new game we're making. And in fact, what I'm going to try and do is talk to the game design teams that are building their games right now and get their documentation, and you can choose which game you want to make a landing page for. And use the Flexbox in this new page to help you lay it out. Now, you're never going to remember all of these styles, but that's okay because there's a nice, really nice website that's much better than I am. I can give you nice lists of things you can modify in these Flexboxes, but it's not as good as the graphical site. So I keep sending you to this guy's site. This complete guide to Flexbox and CSS tricks has pictures. And his pictures are brilliant. So on the left-hand side in purple, and I will put this link in Moodle, are all the container properties. On the right-hand side are properties you can put on divs inside a Flexbox. And I'll answer the question right away. Yes, you can put a Flexbox inside a Flexbox. Inside a Flexbox, inside a Flexbox. There's no limit to how many you can nest. For the parent, it tells you the purple part, the container, and what properties you put on it style-wise. And you can just roll through this site. You can choose what direction things flow in. You can choose how they wrap. You can choose which way they slide with a single style. That's our justify content. You can center them, you can put them at the beginning, the end, make the space evenly around them or between them or evenly around everything. You can also align them. Top, bottom, middle, stretch to fill the container. You can also align the text on the baseline so that all the text lines up with one line. And you can tell it which way all the items inside the container are to align top to bottom. So justify left to right, alignment top to bottom. You can hardwire some of the container sizes. On the items themselves, you can change the order of them. And the other thing you can do is you can modify the way they grow. When you stretch your browser or change the size of a container, the items inside should stretch to fill up until they hit their maximum size. And you can choose the ratio at which they scale. So you can say, hey, the guy on the left scales twice as fast as the one in the middle. You can do the same thing on the way they shrink. Now there's some defaults for these. You can also make one thing pop out different and play with them. So if I go back to my little bio page here, what happens if I take the sizes off these things? So not off the container, but off the image the image themselves.
So they just build it in.
Well, the first part. Let's try this. So there I set the height to 100%. That means make the height the original image height. And because it's got an actual width, it will restrict the width to that maximum. So combining these things, you should be able to control all of the sub-elements on your screen and figure out which sub-elements can modify what parts. So as we start to do that landing page, and we're going to get into it after another break in a sec, as we start looking at that landing page, start with the same process we've done before. Brand new empty folder. Brand new index.html. In your empty folder, you're going to create a CSS folder and an assets folder, or a CSS folder and an images folder. Inside the CSS folder, you may want to copy that style base, so you're starting from a baseline. And then you probably want to sit down on a piece of paper and sketch out your landing page to fit with the requirements in the assignment. All right. And once you have a sketch of what you're doing, then you can start to construct the HTML that matches your sketch, and the CSS. You can start to think about which boxes or containers are going to be flex boxes. So some hints about that. The common thing we will do is we'll make the entire page main portion a flex box. In fact, we might make the whole body a flex box. If I made the whole body a flex box, and then I had 3 subcomponents in it, a header, a main, and a footer, I could make those flex items, and I could justify them to the top of the page. Or I could take the header part out and make it sticky, put it outside of the flex container. So there's lots of options.
I have a question.
Yep.
So just to make sure, to make it a flex box, I would just have to put the little thing, and you know how it's like HTML, put it there, and then you know how it starts like to the very bottom?
Yep.
I would just have to put it there, and everything in there, it's going to be in the box, right? And then I just style it in CSS.
Right. So in the CSS, display flex.
Okay, and but the flex starts like, you know how you put like HTML, and then the HTML is like at the very bottom.
It's just another style. No, it's just another style.
Oh.
So you can attach it to anything you want. Right. And we can attach multiple. So you can have a flex box inside a flex box inside a flex box.
You're killing me.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to draw you a picture.
Yeah, let's take a break.
Okay? I'll come back at 11. And when I come back, we're going to dive into this flex box until you understand it. All right?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
All right, let's put some of this stuff into practice. So, the goal here will be for you to see if you can build a page that takes advantage of what we can do in a Flexbox to build a multi-paneled page. And the biggest thing we get out of that when we use these Flexboxes is not just the centering of information or the layout of information in a nice way, but also for the first time, the ability for us to be able to resize the browser and have nice things happen. That is, if I have a Flexbox with 4 items in it, and I squish the browser this way, the 4 items should drop into a column or 2 columns automatically without me having to do anything. As I stretch it wide again, they should stretch out wide again, so they should wrap nicely. And in order to make this happen, we often have to have a Flexbox inside of a Flexbox. In order to illustrate this, I think the easiest way is to, try and look at a simplified example. So I'm going to start from the design side, the layout side first, and then we'll kind of build up from that. Now, I think as a good example, we'll use the idea of kind of a game landing page. And so I'm going to start by seeing if we can take a look at what that might look like. If I were to use my fancy little drawing tablet here, slide myself out of the way, what I can see is I probably want to build some sort of web page. And in there, I'm going to have a bunch of content that I'm going to want to use and put together. I'm going to probably have some sort of header area. And then one of the things I'll probably do in here is add the title of the application or of the game that we're promoting. I'll probably put a big piece of art here. And I'll likely embed that inside something I can control. Now, on top of this, I'm thinking landing page kind of stuff. So I'm going to want some sort of description of this game. And I'm going to want some media. Whether they're screenshots or video clips or trailers, I want some stuff to look at. If I'm really clever, I'll have another section down here. I'm going to put some boxes around these. Media. Let's put reviews. So just as a simple, straightforward design. And then beneath that, I'm going to add some more stuff. So I might have to scroll in this page a bit, but maybe I'll put in here you know, the play now link, the download it here link, the hey, you know, we've sold you on this whole game idea. Let's kind of like take the next step from that. And so we're going to implement these things by building an HTML page. And we're going to use a resizable set of boxes that are going to flow nicely as we shrink or grow them. So we're going to have our entire page. And we're going to have some elements in our page. We're going to have our main title area. And we're going to add to that our banner. And what we're going to do is we're going to make these things inside one flex box. And then we're going to make another flex box. And that's the part that we're going to put all the stuff about the game into. And inside there, we're going to do another flex box. And then we're going to put our call to action part in a third one. And we're going to put all of these inside a parent flex box. And the reason we're going to do it is the outer parent flex box, we're going to align things top to bottom. And we're just going to make 3 things that align top to bottom. Each one of those things is going to be a flex box on its own. The top one will also align top to bottom. The middle one is going to have 3 sections in it that'll align top to bottom, but each of the sections, the bottom 2 sections, will have things that align left to right. And then our call to action section is probably going to be a separate section at the bottom. So if we have a basic layout of how we want to put these things together, we have a plan we can work to fit our application together. And at that point, I can peel away and start building the HTML to match the diagram. And I'm going to pull that to another place so that you can see both at the same time. So let's just create a new folder for this. I'm just going to call it Flex Page for now. And in there, I'm going to create the default things. A new folder called CSS. A new folder called Assets. A new file, index.html. I'm going to go to my bio page. I'm going to go grab my style base. I'm going to make a copy of it. and put it in my CSS folder. I'm going to create a new file there called style.css. Now, I'm going to start with my index.html. I'm thinking that diagram I did, so doc type HTML, my name, an HTML tag, a head tag, a body tag. It's always the way we start. In the head tag, I've got a title, and I'm going to link in my style.css base. From my local CSS style base. And then I'm going to link in my styles. Oops. Style.css. So that gets our styles loaded. And now I have to start constructing my actual page. What am I going to see? So in the body, I can add a class, and let's just keep it simple. I'm just going to call it flex container. So in my style.css, that's the wrong one. I'm going to put my good old name at the top here. And then I'm just going to start right away. And my default flex container display flex. All I really need to do. Now, that means everything inside the body is going to be a flex item. And I said I would have 3 items. If you look at my diagram, compared to the code that I'm writing, the diagram has 3 main sections. So let's build those sections. I've got a header section. I've got a main section. And I've got a footer. And each one of these is also a flex container.
flex container is one that we're gonna edit. I'm sorry.
Yep.
I just want to make sure.
Yep. And I'm going to make it really clear. I'm going to create a little class called flex item. Now I don't have any styles in it yet.
Although flex items you're creating are using the older CSS style, right?
Yeah.
So CSS, right?
Yeah. Get rid of my cut and paste errors. So these guys are also flex items because they're inside a flex container. Does that make sense to you so far? So I've got a master container. It has 3 items inside it, and those items are also containers of their own.
You can have 2 class styles. You don't have like 2 things in styles in class.
You can have any number of them. They get merged from left to right. So the header is both a flex item for the parent and also a container for anything inside it. So let's put some placeholders in. So with the header, I said I was going to have a title and a banner. So there's a title area.
Would I not put that? I couldn't just put like header 1, like H1.
Yep.
Just write it down like that. Would it be okay?
Yep. Now, inside the title area, I'm going to put some content. And this I might put inside a header. Something like that. And this is a flex item. So things can be both. The indentation helps us identify the hierarchy. Let me go to the web browser here and just find a crazy something or other I can steal from the internet. Ah, yes. I love these ads. Just drop this into the right place. There we go. Good. All right. So what do we have here? So let's do that. Now I'm going to slide this down so you can see kind of the code. I have this diagram I'm working from. And we're also trying to build the code for this. And this way I can also show you that, it doesn't look very exciting yet. But it has our default styles in. You notice I don't have that ugly Times New Roman thing going on there. I'm going to create the banner image. So if we look at my CSS, for the banner image, I'm going to go grab the one I just downloaded. Assets, crazy image. Background size, 100%. And let's go min width. How big is this thing? Yeah, let's do 512. See what we get there. Now, let's make sure our image shows up. 1200. That's not bad. So where is it? Our image is size 00. Where's our image size 00? Yeah. Where's our image size 00? Yeah.
Instead of downloading the image and saving the assets, is there a way to link the image address?
You absolutely can. Yeah, instead of the actual downloaded image in that URL function, you can put the full URL to the actual image there. All right. The only negative side to that is you got to wait for the internet.
That's true. Okay.
Right. And if you're running on a device that is a mobile device and the internet's not connected right now, then that might be a problem.
Okay.
Right.
Good point. Thank you.
So you also have to download it from your web server. So there's some time there either way. My picture got. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. What that really turns into in a more sophisticated environment is you build it first and you start to measure performance to see whether it's slow anywhere. And anywhere that it's slow, you try and download the things or put them on your site or link them in directly. There's other advantages too. If you link an image from the internet or if you link a font from the internet and that font changes on that remote site, then you lose it. Right? If you download it, it's always there. It's a snapshot in time of what it was. All right. Why is my image not showing up the right way? My Why is that? There we go. There we go. There's my crazy image. Now, I got to make my header the size. So my title area here, I'm going to need to make a little bit bigger. I'm going to add a full width class. Where you have these classes, if they end up only being one style, now that's getting done because I messed this up. There we go. And now we can start playing around with our flex boxes. So I've got my stuff hanging out to the side here. And what I've done is I've made the main image the full width of the page. And then I've got my banner section, which is beside it, because our flex container, by default, tries to space things out left to right. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some styles to that flex container, and we're going to add them in a separate class so that we can control them a little better. So we're going to tell it that we want everything that is an item inside this master header container to align itself in columns, not rows. So we're going to take our flex container and we're going to add to it. And here we're talking about justify, is it justify? Content. We want it to be at the start. Line items at the start. Actually, put them in the center. And then we gotta go look at our flex items. Flex direction is the style we want. So we're getting that from the manual, and we want columns. Right. Now, so we've got this flex columns style. I'm going to apply this flex columns and now our stuff starts to line up. So if I look at it, and I'm going to use the debugger to highlight different areas for you, I have a header that is a flex box, and inside it, it has flex items, and the flex box is supposed to be styled with content justified at the start, left to right, at the center, top to bottom, and that stuff is supposed to be arranged in columns, not rows. And then I took this flex box, this header box, and made it the full width of the page. Look at this in the debugger to see it better. I have this header, which is a flex container that is aligned by columns. So it's display flex and then start, center, and it's column oriented. Okay. Now, I'm going to do the same kind of thing with the body so that I've got each, the header, the main, and the footer arranged as columns. Now, if I'm doing this for a site, I'm probably going to drop the word flex from all of these styles because it's redundant. I'm leaving it in there so that it's painfully obvious what I'm doing right now. So I'm going to set the background on that header to be something a little bit different. And I want to be able to see these things. These are debugging aids. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say, hey, you know what? Header background color. Do light blue. Sure. And now I can see the header portion of my site. Now the main portion is another flex box, but this time it's going to be arranged in a little bit more complicated way. This time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to arrange that flex box first in columns, and then I'm going to have flex boxes inside there that I arrange in specific rows. So I'm going to have the orientation change. So I'm going to make another one of these flex rows. Now I haven't used it yet, so nothing should change. Let's go space evenly, align items, center, flex direction, rows. Right? Now, when I look at that CSS, I immediately see that align item center I'm using for both rows and columns. It's always being used. So here's a place where I can percolate it up to my flex container and take it out of there. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some HTML. I'm going to add my main content. And in my main content, I had 3 sections, 2 of which had rows of stuff. I'm going to list lots of cool stuff about the game. These are also flex items. I'm going to have another section media area, and a final section for my review area.
difference between a column and a row?
Columns go this way, up and down. Rows go sideways. Right. In my media area, I'm just going to create 4 simple blocks for now. We're going to replace them later. And then I'm going to go create a little debug thing for that sample block. So this is just kind of a placeholder. Now, with those sample blocks, sample image. Gotta get the names right, Scott. I'm going to get a bunch of blocks. And we can see my bunch of blocks here, and they go down the page. But that's not what I want. I want them to go across the page. So I'm going to have to go add the flex rows to my container. So I want this guy to be a flex container flex rows. Now they go across the page. And just to make sure you can see what they look like, I'm going to add some margin around them. Right? And once again, I can see that I've got my text here, and I really wanted my text above, according to my design. So when I go back and look at the HTML, I can see that I have this description area, which is a flex item, but I also want the main area to be in columns so that the items inside it go top to bottom. And now very quickly, things are lining up very nicely for me, right? I've got a title, I've got a banner, I've got the next title, I've got the next set of items. And I can keep building this way.
How is this so cool?
Well, I'm glad you find it cool.
Mine doesn't look like that. Don't get
Don't worry, mine doesn't either.
It's like I got stuck at the
Yeah. The trick is to wrap your heads around boxes inside boxes.
I mean, I think my head has a putting it on the code.
Yeah.
God, this isn't beginner. Like
This is absolutely, we haven't,
in my life, even like this coding stuff. I just knew that you have to type the HTML together.
technically they don't call this coding. This is just markup.
It's my aesthetic. It's a cool coding
Yeah.
aesthetic. We call it coding.
And for the front-end programmers, they start learning JavaScript by now. They've learned all the HTML by now.
No, but
Okay, so just studying different things.
it's super tough. Okay, but I think I kind of got the idea. I grasped the idea. But the the assignment gonna be like making one of those pages like the one I just made?
Yes.
Oh, cause God, that's super tough. That's very tough.
Yeah. So the way you start by building these, and I'm diving super fast here. Okay, so watch the video part again. You start by, you see the way I built those 4 boxes, right?
Yeah, so it's like idea, like section. Something like boxes and the section, boxes and the section. But then you start going with the flex stuff, and that's where it's like,
Right.
What's the box flex?
So every container is a flex box.
Okay.
Every container here, pick some more colors here. Every container is a flex box. And every container has stuff in it. And the stuff that's in it can also be a container. So think of each one independently.
So flex is just like
A container.
but it's just a container.
It's just a container.
Just flexible. A flexible thing.
Right. Now the crazy part is, and I don't know if this will come across on the display, but because those pink boxes are in a flex container, and the flex box dictates how they flow left to right, as I said, I said in the styles, I said justify the content, space it evenly, and flex direction is rows. So the flex container takes care of that. Now, if this works right, if I take my browser and I squish it, what happens?
Okay, so it's like a smart object, you could say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Now, you can also, when you get more sophisticated, say, hey, those things have a minimum size. They can't get smaller than this. And when you say they have a minimum size, what they will do is they will wrap. And this is how we get more responsive websites. We have the flexible dimensions on things used to manage them. The image, by the way, I just pulled off the internet, was from one of those articles about how our game's addictive. Which the answer is, yeah, that's the way we design them. But let me just shrink down that image so you can see what's going on with the boxes, which is far more important. No, I don't want that. I want that guy. So I'm going to make these images quite a bit smaller. There we go. We'll squish it a bit. Okay. And for those sample images, let's see if I can put in a min width. So all I did here is I made the big image on the top smaller by changing its height. And then the min width here says don't get smaller than that. So let's see if that lets it illustrate what it's supposed to do. It starts to scroll here. Okay. So now we're going to go back and look here. And we're going to adjust some of the flex item properties. Okay. Let's do
Why
the,
would the image kind of flex, like, as a flex item?
which one?
Like, the big image. See how it's, like, closed with a little bracket thing?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you add the image and make it more, like, a smart object?
You could. You could. The problem is you have to give it a width and a height as a background image. If I, what if I make it an image tag? And probably have to put in do it. It's there. It's got the right size, but it's not showing up because it's not finding, or it's not able to show a JPEG image. Why isn't it showing a JPEG image? I wonder if I can just do the, let's just go back to our div. Get my fancy image back. Okay, so let's see what happens if we take the width out. Let's just do that in the inspector. Let's just play with it, break it. You can't hurt anything. If I take the width out, disappears. Take the height out, disappears. What if I make the width a percentage? Right? It doesn't know what size to make it. 100% of what is what it's struggling with. You can use the virtual ones kind of scale with the browser. Sure. So those will kind of scale with it. There's other tricks you can do to make that happen. So once you use those virtual widths, kind of does the same thing. You can also break it apart. And now I've got the image container in a separate style than the background, than the banner image. So here, and we can scale it. Move it around again. And there's another CSS style we can add to the, oops. That looked good. There's another CSS style we can add. We can take a look at on the rows thing, flex wrap, and we can choose to wrap it. And let's make our sample image not virtual widths and heights so they scale, but let's make them, let's just make them actual heights. Let's make them a little bigger. Okay. So now I just set the heights to be specific pixels. We're going to see if we can get it to wrap properly. Let's make them a little wider. You see how they wrap nicely. So that's all done with flex wrap. So you're telling it that the items inside can wrap nicely. When you're working, it may be helpful to split your screen like this so you can see the CSS and the HTML at the same time. If you need to break this up a little bit and put some comments in to help yourself, we can break it up that way. Yeah.
This is going back like quite a few steps, maybe even the last class. But to insert an image, I'm still struggling with it. Like I've tried a few different ways to add it to just the flex page or to like the CSS.
Okay.
This won't let me. I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
So yeah. So if you're working with background images, which I recommend because there's more things you can do with them, you need pretty much 4 things. You need to have the background image style. I have them highlighted here, but you need the background image, which uses a URL to go find the actual image. Uses a URL function to find that image. Whether it's on your computer or whether it's somewhere out on the internet, it's just searching for that URL. Okay. The second part, it needs the background size to be set to 100%, 100%. That keeps the aspect ratio correct. And then it needs a width and a height, an actual width and an actual height, not percentages. So it absolutely needs those 4 things. And one of the ways you can see if it's picking up the image correctly is if you right-click on your browser and click on Inspect, you'll get this inspector up. And when you go look at that image, like here, you should be able to hover over it and it should show you the actual picture and its dimensions.
So it's weird. Whenever I to the CSS style sheet, it doesn't like appear the same way as this. Like I don't get the dot slash. I just get like.
Oh, I typed that in.
You did,
yeah.
That might be why.
Yeah. It's because when you look at the folder structure, inside my style.css is inside a CSS folder. So in order to get to the parent folder, I have to go up one. The parent folder is always the ... folder. So the current folder you're in is a period, and the folder above you is 2 periods. And then make sure the slashes go the Unix way.
I think that helps. Thank you.
Does it work?
Working on it.
All right. Focus on your bio for today. Don't worry about trying to integrate the Flexbox stuff today. Okay? We just want to see the basic HTML and CSS layout. I'm guessing it worked. Yes?
Sorry, still working on it.
So yeah, focus on the bio for tonight. Just do the basic biography, and then I will post the assignment throughout the end of the day, and you guys can start going from there. Now, as far as the basic landing page goes, you don't have to follow my exact layout. If you want to go look at a bunch of game landing pages, there's a million examples out there. And in the last couple minutes, I'm going to show you some examples of some stuff you can do and examples for them. I'll post the links in Moodle. So if we look at some of the cool things that you can do, one of the things you might look at, and there's a link to this CodePen, but you can purely with CSS. This is a collection of images. Each image is in a div. Each div has different margins and border around it, and they're in white, with the font underneath in a separate HTML element. In CodePen, you can see each of the items here. In fact, if I stretch it, you can see the HTML. Collapse it. There we go. So here are all the different Polaroid items, and they've just attached this class Polaroid to them. Some fancy stuff that they're doing with the CSS has to do with when you hover over it, you're changing the shapes and styles of it. So no programming required to make your CSS do some of this.
I finally got it.
You finally got it? Also, this kind of a page turn effect can be done.
My page is gonna look so much like yours. Like, pretty. I'm gonna probably make it
Prettier?
aesthetic. I don't love your colors, but it's gonna look very similar.
You don't want the lime green on fuchsia?
Yeah, I don't like that.
You sure? It's pretty stylish. The other page I'll give you guys to look through. So aside from CSS Tricks, which is a fabulous resource, W3 Schools, this site, CSS Garden, is a wonderful resource for sample pages. Different samples of different kinds of pages. All sorts of different layouts and styles. just to get your creative going on all the cool things that are possible. So I'll post up the links from today's slides. There's not a lot really of new stuff other than the Flexbox, but you're going to have to practice some of this to let it sink in. And then when it comes to your bio, again, don't worry about the Flexbox for your bio. I'll post up. Go ahead. Is it next week?
Yeah.
I made a mistake.
Oh, it better be next week. I haven't started.
Okay, you win. Fine, next week.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I put it down in Moodle that way. It's got to stay. Come on, I wanted to see you sweat a little. It's too easy.
We're learning a lot. Don't worry.
You can do this stuff. You just have to shift your brain a little bit.
If it makes you feel any better, your class is the sweatiest.
No, it's just because it's unfamiliar territory more than anything else. Right? It's not stuff that's just natural and intuitive. So you kind of have to have someone show you roughly how things fit together. The more you do it, the more you start manipulating it. And I would say the biggest thing, remember that chart I showed you at the beginning where you're like, I get it, and things work, and then all of a sudden you run into a roadblock where nothing works and you feel like an idiot. You're not an idiot. You just ran into the limits of your knowledge for the time being. And then you'll struggle with it for a while. And you'll learn from some resource, or you'll ask a question, someone will answer it, and you'll get past that roadblock and you'll go like crazy and you'll think you've completely mastered it until you run into the next roadblock. And the warning we give everybody who starts down this path of writing scripts or code of any kind is that process never changes. And that's how you know you're constantly learning new things. It doesn't change for me either. I do stuff all the time and run into roadblocks I have no idea how to get past. I just try more ambitious things now. So don't be afraid of running into roadblocks and breaking things. Don't be afraid to message me. Fire me a message on Discord. Like, Scott, you got the date wrong. It should have been this week, but, we'll deal with having to do it for next week. I'll just deal with that. And then that'll give me some time to put together the specification for the next assignment. I'll just hang on to that for right now. I don't want to distract you with it. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
You just have to believe me that you know everything you need to know to put your assignment together. It's all out there. In fact, there's not a ton more of new stuff until we start programming JavaScript, and I'm not going to ask you to do that. Right? Although you can do some really amazing, cool stuff.